Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you are joining us today from. It's my pleasure and privilege to actually be, hosting and moderating this webinar. We actually have this platform IBSI hosted by Finastra, and this is an interesting conversation we are looking to have on banking modernization for preparing for what we would like to call as a world of fintech ecosystems. We have with us two eminent panelists. We have with us Chris Cucci. He is the SVP and the Chief of Staff at Climate First Bank, Florida. Chris is he started his career as a technologist. He was with Dell, but subsequently he has been a career banker. He's held senior positions at JP Morgan Chase in the business banking function, and leader with Wells Fargo and with South State Bank before he joined Climate First Bank. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We also have with us Narendra Mistry. Narendra is the Chief Product Officer at Finastra. Interestingly, Narendra, before this current position, was the Product Director in Misys, which was the earlier avatar of Finastra. So he has had a long stint, 25 years, I understand, in this product management, product development function. And he is now the Chief Product Officer at Finastra for International Universal Banking, Cloud, Digital, Product, and Engineering. Narendra, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Ram. Good to be here.
And I am the moderator. My name is Ram. I am a senior partner with Cedar. Cedar is part of the Cedar Group, which is the same group that also has IBS Intelligence, which is the hosting platform for this webinar today. Now we have a interesting agenda for the discussion today. We would be having a quick presentation, or let's say a talk by Narendra, on his views on what he sees around banking modernization. And we would then have an interesting panel discussion, both with Chris and Narendra. And in order to keep our fellow audience, interested in actually sharing their views, we would be peppering this conversation with a few polls. As you know, when we do run these at IBS Intelligence, which is obviously a fintech research firm, a lot of these questions we find very interesting answers. And some of them also give us perspectives on what you think, and also lends us a little different angle to what we're talking today about. So without much ado, why don't I jump into the first poll question so we all get started. And the question that is being posed to you is on your screen. What is the driving factor for community banks and credit unions to tap into digital transformation capabilities? Well, the interesting thing is that it doesn't necessarily have to have one answer. I'm sure many of you would feel that everything is applicable, but you only have a choice of picking one. So we are trying to see what is the most dominant factor that our audience would like to actually believe it is as a driving factor. We will have another 10 seconds and I would end the poll. And let's see what the poll results are. There's an overwhelming response to say that rising demand for seamless digital banking experience is the principal driving factor for community banks and credit unions to tap into digital transformation. So, well, Narendra, you have your context set out there. So,
Well, I'm not surprised, I have to say. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and hi to Chris. Welcome to the session. Yes, I think that polling question actually kind of gives a good segue into what I see as an evolving kind of situation for us. The banking industry has changed quite dramatically, right, for the last sort of decade and a half, etc. But more so in the last 2 to 3 years. Literally, we can see the rise of the non-traditional fintechs that have kind of disrupted the market with the explosion of new technologies. And of course, like the poll said, right, they want the latest personalized service and product experience that they were looking at. And of course, what better than the community banks and the credit unions are really part of that community dedicated to trying to deliver those kind of solutions. And this is where I say that, Finastra is really passionate about banking, and it's digital to the core solution to be able to provide, empower and guide the community banks and credit unions to get to the business growth and the ambitions that they have across the panacea. So, we've seen the digital transformation engagement models coming more and more personalized as we see it. There's also more thought about the wellness of the people, the customers, etc., the ESG element of the whole solution, and we'll talk a lot more about that with Chris and give you some insight into how that is also kind of blending into the overall thinking. Of course, the important thing is that the agility is important. So the ability to scale, the ability to move forward, the ability to grow into different channels, different ways of looking at our business, etc., is really kind of important. And Finastra, of course, as we serve over 9,000 institutions from all sorts of sizes, from rural credit unions to 90 of the world's top 100 banks. We're a global provider of providing these solutions, and we stretch across whether it's the leading open platform for innovation, Fusion Fabric.Cloud, which again we'll talk a little bit more about, but also when you look at our lending, payment, and treasury and capital market solutions that we have, that we actually have indirect channels as well as embedded finance, and we create a platform for what is banking as a service. So that's kind of a general kind of overview of Finastra. But when we look at the key tenants, so this is really the focus for our strategy for our solutions. We see these 5 key tenants that we kind of focus on. Cloud and next generation technology. Clearly, if you want to be able to lead the business, lead the organization, from your perspective as well as our perspective, cloud and next generation technology is a must, because this is the way to look at how we can reduce the total cost of ownership where it makes sense, and also give you the opportunity to drive more of the relevant business that you want to focus on. Data is a really a focal point for many organizations. Many people don't actually realize it, but it's actually a huge amount of knowledge and experience that is in that data that you can harness and be able to understand how that can actually help either your products, your customers, and also looking at the overall business performance and see how that works through. So there's a lot that is going on in the data world, and from that perspective, it's a great insight. Of course, we will continue to make sure that we advance in our core capabilities, both from a functional point of view and a technical perspective. This is an ever-changing world, and we've got to make sure that we are there at the high end of our capabilities. And then, of course, the poll that came back and said, the digital customer experience. This is really important, right? At the end of the day, this is the driver that says that, what does a customer want? They want to see an end-to-end journey which is frictionless, something that actually makes it work, because there are options out there for people, and people can reach out digitally. You no longer have to be in one city or one town at the end of the day. So reach is out there. The reach is out there for financial inclusion, as well as, those which don't or can't afford to have a proper bank account as such from that perspective. So there's a lot more going out there, not just in the US, but also internationally as well. And then, of course, supporting all of that is our Fusion Fabric Cloud platform. So this is the solution that we kicked off a few years back that gave us the leading edge of being able to think about how our fintech ecosystem can connect up to our solutions that drive all of the probable capabilities that you can venture into and understand. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those platform and APIs as part of the discussion. Let's just give you a kind of a brief view about some of the key areas that we tend to focus on at Finastra and how we see the customer alignment with that. And I'm hoping that we will cover, if not all of them, but most of these items in the session. Over to you, Ram.
Thank you, Narendra. That was quite insightful, and I was pleased to see the whole angle of, the customer experience actually finding its place both in the poll and what you just talked about. Before we jump into the panel, maybe it's a good time for us to actually invite our audience to share their views on another question that we would like to pose. We talked about the drivers, but if we were to actually ask about what benefits are we seeking to derive from banking modernization, what would the choice be? Again, only one of the four can be chosen. Is it enhanced experience? Is it reduced IT maintenance? Is it about increased operational efficiency? Or are we talking about improved integration through APIs? That's going to be a tough one, isn't it, Narendra? I think we have equally compelling reasons for.
Yes, I mean, indeed, a lot depends on the business case, right? At the end of the day, but yeah, totally competing. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also important to see customer experience is more external, and let's say operating efficiency is more internal. So it's obviously a tug off between what you see inside versus outside. We'll give 5 seconds more and we'll close the poll.
Yeah.
And I am ending the poll now. Let's see the results. And there you go. Well, it was close. I think we had half of them choosing customer experience. Not surprising again. Clearly that stands out. But efficiency improvement is not far behind. I mean, that's 5% and this is 3-5%. So interesting. And reduce IT maintenance obviously is way down the order. Tells you who's in the audience here, choosing, making the choices out there as well. All right. So let's jump into the discussion, and I would like to actually go to you, Chris. You've actually been a career banker. You worked with JP Morgan. You've worked with the largest community bank, Wells Fargo. You've obviously seen the length and breadth of banking with your experience, right? And if I was to obviously we all recognize that they are crucial, but I would love to hear from you on how crucial do you think are the community banks and credit unions to the US banking industry, and more importantly, where do you think they stand now from the modernization point of view?
Thank you, Ram. So to start off, I think just to give a little context, I briefly want to share where we are today at Climate First Bank. So Climate First Bank is a digital forward startup commercial bank, community bank here, headquartered here in Florida. And as the name suggests, we're a values-based bank. We have a mission to focus on fighting climate change. And we do that by offering products that are going to promote positive environmental and social impact in the communities that we serve. Our intent is to use this digital forward model, this approach, to quickly scale the bank when we exit our de novo period, which will be in June of 2024. So, knowing that we could not be competitive offering digital product solutions relying solely on what the traditional community bank options are. that was part of the reason actually we partnered with Finastra, and saw the Fusion as a solution, as a core for us because of their scalable platform, because of the API connectivity. That allows us to integrate with outside fintech solutions, number one, but also to integrate with those that we develop in-house through our fintech affiliate and partner, which is One Ethos, who recently spun out of the bank under our holding company. So we've been developing in-house solutions since day one, and recently did that spin off of One Ethos. Climate First Bank, will be One Ethos's first customer, and that's going to allow us to demonstrate the viability of the banking as a service technologies that they're developing, which later we're going to offer to other fintechs and financial institutions across the country. So, with that in mind, talking about the community bank landscape today, as we know, I think it was mentioned in the agenda for this call, community banks account for 97% of the number of banks in the U.S. today. And of course, credit unions in the U.S., they're going through a lot of transformation and development as well, beginning to embrace the bank fintech collaboration model to try to accelerate their digitization to remain competitive with neobanks and all of these other options that our customers have today to choose from. The challenge for community banks, I think, is that they rarely have the development teams on staff to support digital services and digital enhancements. So because of this, most community banks are going to rely on the partnership with fintechs to stay competitive and relevant. The opportunity that challenge provides is that community banks are going to be very small, but also very nimble. Decisions can be made and acted upon much more quickly than a large national bank, and even more so than a regional bank. And that's why, in our eyes, developing really strong partnerships with fintechs, with the core provider, those are the things that are so crucial. So that's where I see the opportunity is today in the landscape as far as digitization for community banks and credit unions.
That's very, very useful. Thank you, Chris. Partnership with fintechs, clearly you see as a key factor. And I was mentioning earlier, before we started this webinar, I was chatting with Narendra to say, here we have Climate First Bank, and Narendra is in London right now, and experiencing some of the challenges of what we are experiencing in the climate change as we see. But and coming back to the topic, Narendra, I mean, if you were to actually pick a few, let's say, parameters that you would think are pushing or propelling the community banks and the credit unions to tap into what you would call as advanced capabilities, what would your pick be?
Yeah, I mean, it's along the lines of some of the polls that came through alongside with what Chris is also trying to show here. So the reality is that the demand is there for what we would call a seamless digital banking experience, right? At the end of the day, more focused around the customer, that would be the demand from that perspective. And just owning that whole experience to make sure that the end-to-end journey that I mentioned is frictionless, because there are plenty of options out there for people to go somewhere else if they wanted to, right, at the end of the day. So it's for them to take that opportunity to harness their knowledge, their experience of their customer base, but also then look at what there is for beyond their particular charter. And you can see many, many more community banks and credit unions thinking about what next, what different, what else can I do out there that is going to make a change to the world from that perspective, and see whether I can enter into that particular sector or not, or does it make sense? And there's a huge competitive landscape out there, right? There's lots of fintechs that are out there looking to grow and compete with the banks themselves realistically as to what level of transactions they can take away from that for their growth and for their sake of thinking about it. So, it has to be commercially focused. You have to think about the kind of end user experience that you want to be able to promote, so that when you put that all together, you can actually see that this is the right level of technologies and transformation that's going to give you the growth that you're looking for. That's what I would say around here.
Interesting. Driving end-to-end experience and determining the level of technology. But then you also have a catch here, isn't it, Narendra? You see this historically we've seen that the cost of technology, right, as a factor has always been a challenge, right? Especially when you're dealing with large transformation programs. And, interestingly, Chris mentioned earlier about partnership with fintechs, being a key, let's say, success factor. So do you see APIs as a factor in reducing the cost, and how do you see them actually maybe reducing the complexity, if one may, on any of these large core projects?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, APIs have been around for a long time, so this is nothing new. And for those who have been around the block a few times will know, API is a buzzword, etc. But the difference is that, as solutions in the past, then when they were put together, integrated, they were point-to-point solutions and literally looking inside of each of the solution, which gave no flexibility for other solutions and other products to interact and deal with. So obviously, in the new world today with open RESTful APIs, we now have the ability to think about a business service, a structure that makes sense in terms of what the individual solution or product is trying to do. And this gives it great flexibility and extensibility. And also, it's no longer hard-coded. It is flexible, much more flexible, and therefore you can actually develop your solutions around those business services and make sure that you can actually utilize them not in just one product, but it could be several products when you start to understand those business services. So I think it is a neater way of dealing with it. It's more flexible, more capable, but also when you look at that openness, you can begin to see the potential number of fintechs that can actually start to offer those solutions for you when you have those business services available. And when you have them closed, they're not interested because you're only going to go to one. But if you have several, then you're going to be able to do a lot more. So it gives that flexibility. And of course, once you've got that kind of business service, you're then also able to think about, well, is there an opportunity to monetize that capability as well? Because, of course, that's the next generation of thinking as well, is that actually there's a commodity there that we've been thinking about as to what you can buy. You look at the relevance of open banking and some of the things that are happening with PSD2 and say directives that have been happening in the international markets as well. And you begin to see that there's a drive for that kind of capability. So I think the API is a huge economy that is grown, and clearly the fintechs are taking great advantage of it. And certainly, the cost of all of that is going to become much more reduced because right now you're not having to build all of that capability. That capability is coming to you, and I think that's a great way forward.
Interesting. I mean, you have this situation where you clearly see that smaller banks could actually punch way above their weight should they actually were to leverage fintechs very well. Is the moral of the takeaway that I find from what you just said, Narendra. But before we go there, and I want to just get back again to you, Chris. We talk about community banks and we talk about credit unions, and you've seen them from various perspectives. What if you were to pick the key challenges, right? In particularly from a community banks and credit union standpoint, in the context of what we would call as banking modernization, right? What would you pick, or what would you see as the challenges there?
Sure. So I think the obvious challenge, we've talked about size and scope earlier, significantly smaller staffs than our national and regional counterparts. So because of this, community banks, as I mentioned, have to leverage partner relationships. The challenge in this area that I've encountered, and I think our team has noticed, is that not all of our potential partners understand the regulatory and compliance environment that we operate in as a bank. The fintech environment, while regulated, it doesn't have the same level that we at the banks and credit unions have. When we're looking for a good partner, somebody who understands that regulatory environment, who understands AML, KYC requirements, limitations on how we market is a big thing, how we advertise, and then just the financial disclosure requirements. Those all come to mind as challenges that when we find a partner who understands those areas of our business, it makes accelerating technology side so much easier. The other challenge in banking is that we have a reliance on legacy infrastructure. So this can be addressed through partnerships with our core provider, who understand the needs of a modern bank and have a core that can integrate with others. So I think that's where there's a benefit when you have a core that is open and you have the opportunity to use APIs for connectivity to integrate directly with that core. And then, of course, having that fintech partner internal through One Ethos that can develop that middleware for us, that SaaS, that allows us to connect. That's a big advantage. And of course, the beauty of that is One Ethos is testing it on us, right? So my bank, we're the guinea pig today. And this, of course, will be offered to other institutions in the future, who will be able to take advantage of that so that they do not have to develop that team in-house to experience the same level of challenge that we're experiencing getting it started today.
Interesting. It's a connected world, whichever way you look at it, be it on the APIs or the partners that you see help connecting you with the rest of the ecosystem, right? And maybe I'll switch gears a little bit here and I'll go back to you, Narendra. I mean, there's so much of, let's say, talk about embedded finance, right? And talking about how that's reshaping the banking industry, and there's so much about it that obviously it's relevant and important for this conversation. So what would your points of view on that be?
I mean, embedded finance has sort of really become part of our life, right? You can see the opportunities in wherever you go, whether you go into a car dealership or whether you go to any place where they're prepared to offer you, buy now, pay later kind of scenarios, literally from that perspective. And you can see the embedded finance activities happening much and much more. I mean, I hear 50% of the transactions in the US were done by non-banks, right? So, that tells you that there's a huge amount of drive and potential, I would say, that you can harness from embedded finance and the fintech ecosystem that goes around it, right? So I think it's really important that we understand the space of what is actually happening out there. And remember, we've often heard this statement that says, banking is necessary, but banks are not. So we need to be mindful of that statement, but make sure that we are part of that ecosystem, that we can also orchestrate and demonstrate that level of embedded finance solutions that we can create. And there's so many of them that are coming over now. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think you made this comment about fintech ecosystem, right? I mean, we talk about how, collaborating with fintechs is important. And, from a point where banks were seen to be competing with fintechs, we are seeing, a more collaborative orientation right now. And we see this around the world, right?
Yep.
And clearly, banks also get to see fintechs or the fintech ecosystem, should I say, are helping open the door, for a lot of opportunities to modernize, right? What, have you experienced or seen as the benefits that banks tend to get from this?
So, we started this obviously a good few years ago when we started the Fusion Fabric.Cloud journey, which really is the core focus for Finastra to build on that. And what we said a few years back was that, we constantly go through, and like any other company, we go through a roadmap review. What can you do? What can you build, etc. And you suddenly find that you literally have a limited set of resources with a limited amount of capability. But just imagine that you could potentially offer that capability to the outside world. So, we've been saying a little while back that 99% of the innovation happens in the outside world. And if that is the case, then why not open up our solutions and give the opportunity to all of that potential capability out there that can actually build those solutions, which are going to be much more suited to what the customer really requires out there already in the world, looking to deliver solutions to solve the problems that people are looking into. So from that perspective, we see that the fintech ecosystem is a must. You no longer have to think about, oh, shall I build all of this? Yes, you have to think about it, but the reality is you might be much more better off looking at a solution that's already readily available that you can actually build and work with much more quicker and faster and take it to market, which is really important because remember, the competition is out there for sure.
Very true. As they say, ultimately staying relevant becomes important, and staying relevant, as we be, in the context of staying ahead of competition, or should I say being relevant in the banking ecosystem, as they say, banking will remain and banks may not, but being part of the ecosystem, it goes back to the results of the first poll we had, right? I mean, clearly, as the audience rightly pointed out, I think let's say the bedrock of all of this is about customer experience, right? And most financial institutions have also stated that improving experience is the highest priority. So maybe I'll start with you, Narendra, and probably have the same question to Chris as well. What tools, and experiences do you think institutions are missing, right? Particularly when it comes to meeting with, consumer preferences and customer expectations.
Yeah. I mean, I think the team, the team that are already logged in today have clearly outlined, the omni-channel experience is really important, right? At the end of the day, to expedite the whole process of onboarding from end to end and giving that frictionless view that I kind of talked about. But I think one of the other areas which I briefly touched on was the data and the analytics tools that we have. And I think this is a piece which often gets overlooked because it's a product on the side and it's not part of the main operation. But there's a jewel in that crown, right? That you can really get something out of it, that it can actually transform your business if you understand your customer, the product segments that you're looking to market into, and to understand how that growth can actually happen for you. So there is lots of information that exists. And today we are so involved in giving our information so readily, whether it's to one of the social media things or anything out there that is really digging out and collecting information. That is data that is being collected. And of course, the community banks, credit unions, and also the normal banks all have lots of data. But if you can take that data and analyze it and create the analytics that show you some of that capability, then you've got some decisions that you can make that are going to be much more beneficial for your growth.
Omni-channel and data and analytics. I love the way you paraphrase it as the jewel in the crown, right? I mean, and many times the hidden jewel or the hidden gem that people don't realize, it sits next to you. The amount of insights that you actually have is invaluable as long as you actually pay attention to it, right? And it's almost like Chris, if I could see the number of guitars behind you. It's like, when you are in an orchestra, you got to watch for that particular note, and if you are paying attention, then you could actually catch it there, right? And so maybe I'll pose the question back to you, Chris. So if you were to look at customer experience being the end game, and that's really what is the biggest priority, should I say, for banks, and I'm sure it is for yours as well. What do you think is the missing armor? What are we not having today that you believe needs to be in place to meet those expectations?
Yeah, I think customer experience drives all of the other success metrics within the growth of a bank and the ongoing success once a bank is mature and stabilized. And banking is probably not the first industry, probably not even in the top 10 industries that come to mind when you ask a consumer about industries driving tech innovation, right? I would say that oftentimes it's probably consumer demand that drives the tech innovation in our industry. At the same time, if we as the leaders of a bank attempt to solve the shortcomings of customer experience by waiting for customers to complain and identify those problems, then we'll always be behind the curve. So the banks that are going to be successful in this respect have to do a few things. And data analytics is a big piece of this. So we need to take time to identify the problems. This is not waiting for the customer to tell us what the problem is or what they don't like. This is the bank conducting our own research, looking at the data to see where bottlenecks or where shortfalls occur in the digital customer experience. It happens in the sales funnel, it happens in the onboarding experience. Is it the funding of an account or the closing of a loan? So we need to look at those areas and identify where the weak points are. And then seeking out better alternatives through technology, finding technology that's going to work better for what customers' expectations are today based on the other ways that they conduct business and do things, shop and do everything else digitally. The challenge with, I think, that a lot of bank leaders would express when you task them with this is time. They're going to say they just don't have the time to do this. And that's where the partnerships bridge the gap. So we do rely on partners who have done this research, who have the data that they can show to us. Banks, the people running a bank love metrics, they love data. So you show them the data that can back up these solutions. And then I think that the bank leadership is going to be more open to the proposals. And that's what I think some small institutions are missing. They need help in identifying the problem. And they need that data to back up the proposed solutions. So just very generally speaking, we're in a world today where the in-person branch banking experience is going away. We're placing a lot more reliance on that digital experience. I know we are for sure, because we have this net zero principle. We don't want to have a carbon footprint as a bank. That's very difficult to do with buildings everywhere. So we are minimizing the number of branches, and we have what is our fastest growing branch, which is our digital branch today. And the digital branch, though, that allows us to engage with customers, provide them with different solutions. It has to be more than where it is today, where you have an alternative. You either walk in and talk to a live person in the branch, or you go online and you figure it out yourself, or use a AI chatbot and figure it out. So there's a middle solution there where there's still some personal experience, but it's more scalable than having geographic, physical branches placed everywhere. And I think that what needs to exist is that middle solution that provides the same level of customer attention and personal touch, but with the convenience and the scalability of a digital branch solution.
Yeah, and Chris, what I would also add is that the analytics piece is not necessarily just for the banks, but in fact for the end consumer, because they love to see some of their patterns and trends of what they've been doing and how they're doing it. And it gives them an ability to think, oh, perhaps I could do this or that or the other. And that is, again, another way of engaging with the customer experience as well. And I think we've found that to be quite a topic as well for some of the discussions with some of our customers.
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely.
I love the way you articulated that, Chris. I mean, ensuring you have the personal touch, but not compromising on scalability driven by the digital experience. I think that's a very interesting combination to have, right? And I don't know. I mean, if when financial institutions embark on these modernization journeys, right, Chris? I mean, are these the kind of factors you look for? What would you call as the considerations that need to be in place when any bank looks, particularly credit unions and community banks, when they embark on a core modernization journey? I mean, there's a lot of people in the audience, I'm sure, here who love to hear from you on what should be the considerations they should have in place here. Sure.
I think this, to your point, it's something that's universal with any bank who's making these decisions, any credit union today. I mean, one of the keys is being educated on the topics and staying up to date. And I think that's important, especially in this segment, because things are constantly developing. I feel like if I miss the news for 4 to 6 weeks, and I use TechCrunch a lot for that to get news on what's going on in the fintech world. And if I'm missing emails and not reading their newsletter, I'm behind after 4 to 6 weeks. You lose track of what's going on in the industry. So it's so important to keep up on that, or to talk to people who are keeping up on it. There also needs to be a balance, right, between business needs, the things that make money on a daily basis, right? And then resource allocation, and having a very defined strategy. So you have to create a plan, but then you also have to follow that plan and execute on it. It's not enough to just create a really good business plan. We have to execute properly. But also you have to be nimble. You have to know that things can change rapidly because like I said, the technology is changing all the time. So you create the plan, you execute on it, but then you have to be willing to be flexible and to pivot at times. And I keep saying it, but I mean, this is where relationships are key. When you find the right partners, you have to stick with them and leverage them to work consistently and work quickly to execute and deliver on that strategy.
Fabulous. Stay educated, have a plan, but be willing to be flexible and execute the plan, but be adaptable to change and stay nimble and leverage partnerships. I mean, couldn't have summarized that better, Chris. Very, very insightful. In fact, maybe I'll go back to you here, Narendra. I mean, you've been a veteran, seen this, in various places. Could you help us with some use cases or examples where you've seen this work well, and any light you would like to shed on approaches that actually help address these expectations there?
I mean, I think, look, when you're looking at modernization of a solution, people often think that it's a technology upgrade, literally from that perspective. But the reality is that you have to have a business strategy in mind. And until you have a business strategy in mind, then the rest of it becomes an enabler, right? At the end of the day. So, if you set the value proposition or the customer value in terms of what they're going to achieve from the business strategy that you're driving, that then leads to effectively the scope of what you're looking at building, right? And what you're looking at delivering. And I think, like Chris said, you go through all the different elements of, having a plan and being able to deliver that. But the first is the business case tight? Does it make sense? Because often you go down a path and suddenly find that either you don't understand the business case or something has changed dramatically, and all of a sudden you have an issue or two to deal with, or probably a lot more at times, right? But I think, when you understand the goal that you're trying to achieve and of course appreciate your business case and how that's going to work through, there will be change in that. And of course, managing that change is really important. And what we've seen quite often is that you see a wonderful plan, but nobody's able to actually manage that or deal with the potential changes. And we know that as soon as a plan is built, it will change. That is the reality, right? At the end of the day, the question is, how do you steer people closer to what you want to achieve at the end of the day? And it's also a mindset issue as well, because don't forget, the modernization journey is not just about, going from A to B. It's also a business transformation at a point as well, where you're looking at your operational efficiencies, and things will be different from where you are today to where you're going to go to, and really need to think about how does that work. And it's also a great opportunity to cleanse data, right? To get to a better set of data, which then drives you more of that capability that we kind of talked about a little earlier. So, having those elements in mind actually gives you a better approach, and keep in mind the end goal of what you're trying to achieve, because you can get so into the details that you don't actually understand what you're doing, and you need people to stand there behind and actually look at it. And therefore, your steering groups and governance structures, all of those things play a real play into the game for what you're trying to achieve. So lots of people on this call will have had a lot of experience on this. They all know how difficult it is or can be, especially when you hit the difficult roadblocks that you got ahead. But the important thing is that if you have a flexible solution, if you have the flexible capabilities around it, at least you know which way you're going to head, at least from that perspective.
This is very, very insightful, Narendra. We're talking about having a plan, making sure that you have a plan, but you are flexible. And I quite love the way you articulated that. Don't miss the forest for the trees, and keep the big picture. Accommodating changes here and there, should not lose sight of why you're doing this. And to that extent, having that mindset of business transformation, aligning with the business strategies is critical. Chris, do you have anything to say on this topic? I mean, your own experiences, use cases, approaches that would actually be relevant for our audience to know.
Yeah, I could share a couple of real life examples that I think cover the concept of developing that business case and then being able to collaborate and execute on it. The first that comes to mind, which is a fairly recent example for us, One Ethos had developed a digital lending platform for residential solar, for rooftop solar for homes at Climate First, and that went live in May of this year. So that development platform involved internally collaboration with our bank credit team to develop underwriting criteria for an automated underwriting platform. Then, of course, the One Ethos team was tasked with putting together a front-end interface and application process. And then we wanted to automate as much possible to the furthest extent, to make this as scalable as we could, even at it's kind of an MVP level, with knowing future enhancements would happen. That included things like integrating with external credit bureau, customer data collection, loan document preparation, and then, of course, the automated underwriting system. So the crucial part in making all of that work and making that a scalable product for us was integration with the core. So that's where another partner came in. So you have One Ethos, numerous departments within the bank, and then talking with Finastra and having to work with numerous departments as well within Finastra. So in the end, you have 3 different companies, 3 firms, numerous departments within all of them, collaborating to develop this one solution. Which that solution today is something that Climate First Bank uses, and in the future will be offered to other financial institutions as well. And by the way, it's off to a great start. So in just, 10 weeks now since we've launched that digital platform, we have done almost 4 times the amount of loan volume in solar lending that we did all of this first 6 months that we had opened the bank. So in 10 weeks, more than 4 times what we did in 6 months last year, which just speaks to the level of, one, the interest that customers have in having a digital experience for their loan application, but then also the efficiencies that are built around using that application process versus a traditional manual underwriting. The other example I would share has been our collaboration with Finastra. And, anyone that has banked at a small bank as a customer or has worked in a small community bank or credit union, I'm sure would agree that the mobile banking experience is usually, there's nothing too special or too unique about it. But through collaboration with Finastra and with some external fintechs we're working with, we've been able to take that off-the-shelf mobile banking experience and basically reskin it to give it a UI that is really in line with the branding that we want to have and with our mission as a climate-focused bank to be able to do things like impact reporting, where we can show our customers the impact that they're making by banking with us. So by having money in their bank account, how many solar loans is that producing in the community? How many green building loans? And what is the carbon offset of those loans that are being produced? So there's a reporting aspect to that, which shareholders like to see, the ESG metrics. But then there is also a marketing aspect to it, because customers see our name, they identify with the name, and then we can kind of further enhance that brand loyalty by providing with them with this digital banking experience that's really in tune with what we're doing as a brand. So, I think that really builds a lot of loyalty and brand identity. Those things are invaluable to a bank, especially when we're trying to get started, and it helps us to differentiate ourselves in the market.
Thank you. Having done something in 10 weeks as to what you did, in 6 months, speaks for itself, right? I mean, that's like incredible, performance there. And I would suspect, you're talking about digital platform, and we all, recall this famous joke, right? I mean, the biggest contributor to digital acceleration is not the CTO or the CEO or the CIO. It is COVID, as they say, and it's actually played a very important role, as I call it, as the silver line of the dark cloud. And, maybe Narendra, if I was to come back to you, right, I mean, clearly you see that the COVID impact and the inflation impact, the economic
Yes.
impact clearly is making a lot of, small and medium-sized businesses, that they're looking for need of financing, right, to cope with this. So, I mean, considering that we actually are, talking about community banks today, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how can community banks, financial institutions, lend more to these small and medium businesses by using, let's say, emerging technologies that not only helps the economy and the bank, but also
Yeah.
so that we address this issue.
I think we briefly touched on it, and it's obviously, it's definitely opened our eyes, right, in terms of what's happened. We talked about the fintech rush prior to the pandemic, but it was a question of is it a serious thing or not? But now, clearly, after the pandemic, everyone realizes that the digital reach is really important, right, to the end consumer, and especially when you look at things like financial inclusion as an overall topic for getting the fundings out to those business and communities that really need it from that perspective. And this is, again, all related to the fact that are you using the right level of enablement and technologies to be able to deliver and communicate with your customer and provide that what I was calling the frictionless end-to-end journey, and ensuring that it's all there from that perspective. And clearly, that the whole embedded finance piece is coming into play here. So there are more players on the scene. There's lots of competition out there that we're getting into. So, this kind of banking experience, etc., has to be part of the customer journey in order to be able to reach those roots of potential customers out there from that perspective. So the digital approach, as we touched on at the very beginning of this session, is really important, and therefore the modernization process of your solution has to be ready, has to be available for you to start thinking about what you can do. And if you haven't started that already, then potentially you might be quite late in that journey as well. And we know what's happening now in the market, that of course after COVID, we had a bit of a stagnation about what's going to happen with all of these potential credit unions and banks that we've got out there. And you can see that they are merging, they are becoming bigger. How can they grow from that perspective? So, the COVID has given us a directive to actually reinitiate and shape the modernization process very, very quickly and very fast. It's opened our eyes to thinking differently than what we've thought before.
Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, right? So you do have this. We would, very soon take questions from the audience, and it's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions that our audience have to ask both the panelists. But before we let them ask questions, let us ask them some questions. We have the next poll here. And the question here is for all of us to see: what would be the consideration for institutions when they embark on the core modernization journey? It's the deployment model. Is it the implementation partner? It's the right contingency plan to tackle migration risk? Or is it about leveraging best practices from advanced markets, right? Sometimes they may actually go hand in hand. I mean, choosing the correct deployment model may also be to do with choosing the right partner. And when you leverage best practices, you obviously will have a contingency plan. So I guess, these are trick questions out there. But while we are waiting for the results, I couldn't but resist, Chris, if you could actually share a word or two about the guitar, and you were talking about, your the new, both my sons are actually, big time into this, and they would love here to know about, what you're doing about learning piano from YouTube. So maybe you can share us a word about it before we publish the results here or maybe I'll publish the results first and then we'll jump into that. Yeah. So let's do that right away. 5 seconds more and I'm closing the poll. All right. I'm closing the poll. And the results are out there. Well, that's a tie almost there, right? choosing the correct deployment model, choosing the right implementation partner, and leveraging best practices. I guess, choosing the partner obviously is the topper, but very closely followed by the other two. Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's learning the lessons, right? I mean, this modernization process has been happening for a while, so there is experience out there. But these are all very much aligned realistically. If you don't have the right deployment model, then your cost becomes more expensive, clearly. And if you don't have the implementation partner with the right experience, again, your cost will increase with potential damage to the project or the plan or whatever that is being worked through. And so, yeah, absolutely, I think makes a lot of sense.
Very interesting. Yeah, you're right. I guess it's all interconnected, and I guess it's all about learning from others, right? And not necessarily learning it the hard way every time. So we will jump into audience questions here. But before I did that, Chris, you will have to tell us a little more about your musical journey. I mean, I think it's important for our audience to know about it as well.
Okay, yeah. So this is a real background, not a virtual background, and I'm in my home office here. Most of us at our bank work remotely. So I've been playing guitar for over 30 years now, and still find time. Hopefully, I should say almost every night to play as kind of a meditation, something to take me away from using my device, answering texts and emails late at night, scrolling through social media. Instead, I play guitar, and it takes my mind off of the day and gets me ready to hopefully get some restful sleep. Lately, I think I shared with you earlier, I've been trying to learn piano. I wouldn't want to perform for anyone because I'm not so good yet, but I've been using YouTube to take classes, learning lessons on YouTube. And I was just saying earlier that I think it's a wonderful resource for young people who are wanting to learn music today that I did not have growing up. I learned from a guitar magazine or a book, but to be able to learn from somebody through video, it is just so much more effective. And even for me, I know they say the older you get, the harder it is to learn things. So I'm probably not picking it up as quickly as some of my friends with their young children, but I'm getting there little by little, and it's very enjoyable. So anyone who wants to learn an instrument, no matter what age, I think that YouTube has some really great free resources.
Very inspiring, Chris. Indeed, very inspiring. Well, I mean, you did mention that after that, you do answer some, queries. And so here is one for you. So we'll actually pose this. There's a question here from our audience. People who want to ask questions, you'll find a small button at the bottom of your screen called Q&A. Please feel free to pose questions. So here is one for you, Chris. What are community banks doing for their operational and organizational resiliency?
Okay. That's a big question, I think, but I'm assuming that's probably meant in the context of digitization, the digital experience, and it's a good question in that context, because that's something that we've identified as you open yourself up from a traditional community bank model where you're reliant on your local bankers and their known relationships. Our customers today are not just the local community, it's anyone who can visit our website and open a bank account. So you really do have to have strong digital solutions for the KYC, anti-money laundering, know your customer, anti-money laundering practices. Beyond that, because that's just one piece of the risk profile, the other thing that I think is so important is having good anti-fraud measures. Unfortunately, that's something that we deal with all the time. And so when new accounts are being opened, we have to have technology, and we have to have the people behind the technology on staff in our operational teams to identify those red flags that could suggest that an account may not be a valid account or a valid customer. And then beyond that, of course, it's going to be, that's the people side of it. The other piece is the transactional side. So the hold policies that a traditional community bank has, which are normally a little bit more liberal than your larger national banks, they have to think that they're going to have a different policy for those local branch customers, let's call them, versus your digital customers. The digital customers, there has to be an enhanced level of operational risk assessment. So having longer check hold periods, having different levels of validation that you do to verify that a transaction is a real transaction, very important. Something that I think we're dealing with more and more. And as we scale up, I'm sure that it will be something that evolves for us.
Interesting. Thank you, Chris. There is another question for you here, Narendra, and this is from Ajit Vasudevan. The question is, how important is regulatory framework for fintech implementations, and have you faced any hurdles from a regulatory or a compliance perspective?
So yes, an excellent question. Of course, this ties into our fintech ecosystem of looking to see how they can help with some of the changes that are happening in the regulation. But yes, it's really important that the regulation is there. I mean, Chris just described some of the operational pieces that are required in order to run part of the business. But again, regulation is also really starting to think, how can they potentially regulate fintechs, for example? So banking is one thing, of course, fintechs is another. So there's a real challenge going on out there about to saying, how do you deal with those differences that are going out there from that perspective? But we have to be mindful. At the end of the day, we have to think about customer centricity at the end of the day. And the customer needs to be in good state and well looked after. And of course, the regulation is all there to protect that customer base from that perspective. So there is plenty going on outside there. And then, of course, we've seen some experiences where, you take a solution that gives you an end result, but it actually doesn't necessarily fulfill what a regulation might be looking for. So we have to be very, very careful from that perspective and think through that.
Interesting. There's another question here, and this is from Mark Ferguson, and his question goes as this: where does digital currency landscape play in this journey of digital banks? And given the recent volatility we see in crypto and all the volatility in the market, do you see the role of crypto in the broader ecosystem? I know it's a little offbeat from the topic we have today, but either of you choose to answer this. Yeah.
I mean, I'll pick it up and pass it on to Chris, but I think this actually ties into the regulation piece very much so. I mean, this is one area where I know that the credit association and various bodies like that are really looking to see how can they control this, because the idea is not to control them, right? That's the whole idea. It's a non-regulation actually from that perspective. So it is something that people are looking at it, but I think what we've seen in the past few business cases that we've looked at with some of the customers is that they really have to have a solid business case to show how they're going to manage and monitor that level of currency. And they have to go through a certain number of hoops to be able to present that. And the question is, do they have time and energy to go through all of that process? Do they want to invest time and energy into that? I think that's a very interesting topic, and we should think about having a discussion along all of those lines. Chris?
Well, we've run out of time, and we already 2 minutes past the scheduled time. But I just have one last question here. This is for you, Chris. There's someone who's actually posed this question on what are the areas that you see community banks or credit unions are likely to be impacted with open banking. Either of you can answer this question, and we'll close the webinar with that question.
Yeah, I think open banking is going to impact really all aspects of our business. From a compliance standpoint, you have to look at the fact that there is information sharing occurring. So there's going to be controls that are put in place to protect the consumers, protect their data. From a business standpoint, I think it's a positive thing for small institutions, because I think it allows us to have a more level playing field with the large national and regional banks. Again, it comes down to having the right partnerships and knowing who you're working with. But if you develop those partnerships, open banking really serves to put you on a level where you can offer a wider area of products and services that match those larger institutions, which would be very difficult with the traditional banking system from a cost and a growth standpoint.
Definitely, it's a great opportunity. I mean, it's the fact that traditional banks now told to open up their information and provide that information no longer is the bank owning the information. It's actually the consumer, the one that is actually taking charge of their data. Remember the word data. And I think, again, it all goes back to that same conversation as to who owns that information and what can you give out. So actually, there's a great opportunity for, potential fintechs or credit unions or banks who want to participate in that, actually grab the customer market from those potential other banks that are out there. So that's the way we have actually seen a lot of it function across parts of the globe where they've taken open banking much more seriously. But it's definitely a great opportunity. Yeah.
Well, we are in the middle of changing times, and I guess all of us are keen to see what's in store as we move along. As they say, all good things have to come to an end, and as much as I wish we could continue, we've already 5 minutes over the scheduled slot, so I will have to draw the curtains here. Thank you so much, Narendra. Thank you, Chris. It's been wonderful chatting with you, and let's stay in touch.